Hi, I am Ed Fava, NAUI number 51209. I'm an instructor at Get Wet Scuba in 29 Palms, California. And in this video, we will be talking about scuba logbooks and how to use them. Let's get right into it. So, what is a logbook? A logbook is a record of your diving. For recreational divers and professional divers, they serve slightly different purposes. For the recreational diver, it is a personal record of your diving. Is a helpful reference of the diving you have done, as well as tracking your progress in diving. It is also a record that instructors and shops may ask to see before they allow you to enroll in advanced recreational courses. So it acts as a chronological record of your diving, as well as kind of an interesting way to collect stamps, track memories, what you've seen, what you've done. The really important part of it is that it tracks the conditions and the gear that you've used. So if you take some time off of diving, or if there's a site you have not been to in a while, and you go back, you can refer to your logbook for helpful details. What gear you wore, how much weight you wore, entry and exit points, details that you want to remember for that particular dive site. And writing those down those thoughts while they're fresh in your logbook is very helpful. For the professional diver or for the recreational diver who is considering taking a professional route, you must log dives. You must have some sort of verifiable record of the dives you have done before starting a professional scuba diving program. Sometimes it's 50, 40, 50, 100 dives, whatever it is, depending on the agency and depending on the level of certification you're looking to achieve. But having some sort of a signed off record, so when you do that dive, you log it, and then you have an instructor or a dive master, in some cases a buddy, sign off that you in fact did that dive. And that's going to be needed before you can, again, enter into that professional training. Something to keep in mind, though, is that your logbook is not a legal document. You can forge all the information in there you want. There's nothing about it that is an real official document. Diving kind of operates on an honor system where you have a card, but when someone says, "Are you a good diver?" you got to be honest. It's very difficult for a dive shop, and I've worked at a few. I've worked with them internationally. That if we have a tourist come from overseas, we kind of have to take their word for their level of experience. But something else I can tell you is that as a dive master and an instructor, and someone who has taken people from all over the world diving, we can tell really quickly if you are a good diver. We can tell really quickly on that first dive that we take you out if you're telling us the truth as far as how good you are. This is why anytime you go to a new dive shop, especially to a resort, someplace that's taking out a lot of tourists, they're going to take you on a check dive. You might not know you're going on a check dive, but that first dive is a check dive. And the dive masters and instructors there are taking you out to verify your skills for your safety and theirs. Also, your dive log is only as accurate and as useful as you make it. If you only ever write down, hey, I went to this depth for this time at this date, that's not really going to help you much. That's not information that is really going to help you in the future. That's sort of immediate stuff as you're trying to figure out your no decompression limits for the day, and how much dive time do you have on your next dive. But as a useful lasting document that you can look back on and pull good information from. If you leave out details, it's just going to be useless to you. And to that, there's also no limit on the amount of detail and information that you can put in your logbook. I have seen people keep wonderful logbooks, detailed notes. They've drawn out maps. They have, sketched what they've seen. They have mapped out dive sites. Really put in a lot of detail about them, their dive buddy, the conditions. And that acts as a really good document for when they want to go back to a dive site, or if they're going to someplace that's similar to that last site, they can pull it up and get some good information, what they might expect to see, the conditions that they may expect to dive in, what kind of gear they may want to wear. Did they have on enough wetsuit? Did they have on too much wetsuit? Did they want a different kind of fins? Did they like the regulator that they were using? Again, this is a document that is your personal dive record, and the more detail you keep in it, the more valuable it will be to you. So how do we use a logbook? Well, first thing is that there is no standard logbook. I'm going to show you an example page here, and the one you're probably going to be filling out as part of your open water course will be somewhat similar. And if you go on to the internet and you do a web search for scuba logbook pages, you're going to see a wide variety of pages, of documents that you can use that have a wide variety of information and fields that you can fill in. The example I'm going to show you is probably the most basic example of a scuba logbook page. But again, you can use anything you want as long as it contains certain basic information. And like I said before, the more details you keep, the more details you track, the more useful this document is to you. And it doesn't even have to be an official scuba logbook. You can just get a notebook, and as long as again you're keeping that sort of basic information of where you dove, when you dove, how deep, for how long, then again you can go ahead and include any other details you want. Again, it's not a legal document, so it's not like there is a legal version and a non-legal version. It's the information that you think is really important and the information you're going to use in order to safely plan and execute dives. So yeah, there is some basic information that you will generally see in every single logbook. So the date, the dive number. So this is your first, second, third, fourth, 100th, 3,000th, 3,000. If you had 3,000 dives, which dive number it is. That's something a lot of people like to track. Make something out of their 100th dive, their 500th dive, their 1,000th dive. It being a special thing and something to commemorate. Where you dove. Your breathing gas details, so were you breathing air, were you breathing nitrox, were you breathing some other mix? There will be some sort of a model square dive profile. So what time you went down, how deep you went, how long you stayed, what time you came up, did you do a surface, a safety stop? And then from that you can track your surface interval from the time you ended your dive to when you begin your next dive. Usually you'll see some gear details on there. About your scuba cylinder, so its size and material. There'll usually be some things there. What kind of wetsuit or exposure protection that you use? Did you use a shorty? Did you use a full suit? Did you use a Farmer John and shorty? Did you use a hood? How much weight you needed? Now that is, I can tell you right now, probably the most important detail for you to track. Because if you do not dive often, you will forget how much weight you need. And you're going to have to go through a weight check every single time you forget how much weight you need, and it's going to be a calibration process of the dive shop you go to giving you too much weight, and you having to figure out, what's the right amount of weight. If you track the weight and the wetsuit and your gear, and kind of say, okay, when I wore a shorty, I needed this much weight. When I wore a full suit, I needed this much weight. You can go back to that and reference it and not have to play a guessing game for weight. Again, as someone who's worked at dive shops, when someone knows how much weight they need is really good, because we're not having to screw around with that in the water and make big adjustments and watch people kind of struggle with their buoyancy. So also your surface and in-water conditions. So there's typically going to be a field for surface temperature and the in-water temperature. Was it calm? Was there surf? Was there current? Were you in at a tide or not? And then there's going to be an area for your buddy, your dive master, or your instructor to sign. Maybe a spot for a stamp. A lot of people like to collect stamps from the dive shops they visit. But those are some pretty typical and self-explanatory fields on a dive log. I don't think I have to explain the concept of date or location to you. So other helpful details that there may or may not be fields for, but I encourage you to track what you saw. So you go to a dive site and you see some interesting things. Maybe it's some nudibranchs, it's sharks, it's a particular coral that you're interested in. If you're an underwater fisherman, that you happen to see a scallop bed someplace, or you happen to see bass or tautog or tuna, some fish that you're interested in hunting, and that's where you saw it, and at what depth, what was the water temperature, all these sorts of things. What conditions do you want to go back at? So again, keeping that record. Again, you can draw a little map of the site, which is a great thing, so that when you go back to that, you can say, okay, I know that there's a pinnacle that I want to go see, and it is about 500 feet out, and I need to go down about, it's the top of the pinnacle is at about 60 feet, and that's something you can track. You can even potentially put in some compass coordinates to try to find it in the future. But having a little map that you've drawn is excellent. Site entry and exit details. So if there's a parking area, if you have to climb down or climb up, if it's muddy, again, things that you can go back and reference. So as you're planning dives in the future, you can say, oh yeah, that spot, we had to park way away. So maybe we want to carry our gear down first. We don't want to gear up at the car. We can carry things down so we're not wearing everything as we're walking down. Having those details, if it's an easy entry or a difficult entry, things like that are good to track. Any issues you had during the dive. Again, you may not be diving regularly. So if it's like a year until you dive again, being able to go back and say, oh yeah, I had trouble with my BC, or I had trouble with that fin strap, I better get that fixed. Or when I got down to this depth, my regulator was acting funny. Making a note of that in case that is a problem that needs to be fixed. Take that to be serviced, or something that you really want to pay attention to on your reg if that regularly happens. But having some sort of a note, anything, maybe what you want to see when you go back. So as you again, you are looking back at your logbook, you have not been to a particular dive site in a few years, say, oh yeah, I wanted to try and see this thing that I heard that there's a car that they sunk out there, and I want to go find that. Or something along those lines. If there's a particular animal that you heard that there's a seahorse that's out there that you want to go find. But having those notes so you don't forget. And then any other information that you would want to aid you in a future dive, or anything you'd want to recall about that dive. Yeah, again, this is a personal record. It is only as useful as you make it. So make it as useful as you can. So now we're into how to actually complete a dive profile in your logbook. This is the not intuitive part. So you'll see over here that we have things like location, the purpose of the dive, your buddy, the conditions. These are all pretty self-explanatory things. You know, where you were at, the conditions. It was clear. It was a clear day. The water was, you had 100 feet of visibility, or it was an overcast day. We only had 10 feet of visibility. We saw mostly mud. Things like that. In the remarks, you have a little section here for, again, any notes. Up top here, we talked about your dive number and the date, the air temperature, the visibility at the bottom, how much air. So again, you start with 3,000 psi in your cylinder, and you end with I don't know, 800 psi in your cylinder. Here it has your depth, your average depth, and your max depth. Again, pretty self-explanatory fields. Over here, actually, this is something that some people track. So hours. So how many hours total you've had underwater. So say that you've had at this point, 10 hours and 20 minutes underwater. Well, you can go ahead and say, well, I dove for another hour and a half. So now I have 11 hours and 50 minutes total. And some people like to track their underwater time, and just as a point of interest. But what we have are some fields that we'll see in or some things that we're going to track in most every dive log. So your surface interval is a big one. In your first dive, your surface interval is 0. And surface intervals go from 0 to 24 hours. Once we pass 24 hours since the last time we were in the water, we assume it's just an unlimited surface interval, and we're back to 0. We're not tracking surface interval because we've assumed all the nitrogen has off-gassed from our tissue, and we're back to equilibrium with surface pressure. But that surface interval is the time between ending your last dive and the time you break the water entering your next dive. If you've already seen the dive tables, the air tables video, then you understand the purpose of tracking our surface interval and tracking the nitrogen absorption and release from our tissue, and how important that is. Also on here, you'll see PD and PD plus. So this is a dive planning function. So your planned depth, your planned maximum depth, and then your next planned maximum depth in case you violate, as you go deeper than your planned maximum depth. So let's say your planned maximum depth is 50 feet. Your next planned maximum depth is going to be 60 feet, because on the dive tables, and we're assuming you're using dive tables to use this, that would be the next max depth. The next depth you would track. And to correspond with your planned depth, we see maximum dive time and adjusted maximum dive time. So the A in parentheses is adjusted. That's because if we are doing a repetitive dive, we know that we already have some nitrogen in our system, and our dive time is adjusted. Our max dive time is adjusted. It's not just what it says on table 1. We have to use that number from table 3. So we have our planned depth, and whatever our maximum dive time or adjusted maximum dive time is at our planned depth. And then we go to our planned depth plus, so again, that next deeper depth, and then take a look at what our maximum dive time or our adjusted maximum dive time would be at that maximum, at that next maximum depth. So if we go deeper, we'll say, oh, we can't stay as long. We went past 50 feet. Now we have to use that 60-foot maximum dive time. do we have enough time now? Look at your bottom timer and say, okay, we went down to 55 feet. We're rounding up to 60. You know, our planned maximum dive time is no longer valid. We have to look at our next deepest depths maximum dive time. So that's something that, having written down on a slate or something that you've discussed, you know, and committed to memory prior to diving, is important. Having this on a slate is actually really, really good. Any pertinent information, having a slate, or just carrying a slate to be able to kind of write little messages between you and your buddy that might be more complicated than what you can express with hand signals. It's also really good if you're trying to draw that little map of the dive site, or kind of take little notes that you want to include in your log. A slate is a terrific tool. So PG, your pressure group. So we don't see that explicitly on this, but if you go above here, you could write your pressure group above here, your starting pressure group, and then your ending pressure group, as you are filling out your profile. Again, this just has a nice little square profile here. Your planned depth, your next deepest planned depth, same thing with your maximum dive times. Here, where we see D, that's your actual depth. So this is these 4 fields you'd fill out prior to the dive as part of a dive planning function. The D here, that's the actual depth you went to. That's your actual maximum depth, which you would then use that when we get out, take out our dive table, say, okay, we actually went this deep, and we actually went for this amount of time, and then use that to figure out what our residual nitrogen time, our adjusted dive time, and total our residual nitrogen time, our actual dive time, and then our total nitrogen time is. So taking that residual nitrogen time we started with, adding it to our actual dive time that we spent at our actual max depth, and adding those up gives us our total nitrogen time, which we can then, you know, we take that from table 3, go back up to table 1, and find a new pressure group. So if you had a residual nitrogen time of 13 minutes and an actual dive time of 50 minutes, then your total nitrogen time would be 63 minutes. You would add that residual nitrogen time to your actual dive time, give your total nitrogen time, and that's the number you would use in table 1 of your dive tables to calculate your pressure group and how much nitrogen has been absorbed into your tissue. Let me move my mouse over. And okay, so we were just talking about this. Your residual nitrogen time, your actual bottom time for actual dive time, and your total nitrogen time. So that residual nitrogen time, how much nitrogen was left over that you did not finish off gassing during your surface interval, your actual bottom time, which again, that starts when you break the surface going down and ends when you break the surface hitting air at the end of your dive. As long as you're underwater, your dive clock is ticking. And then your total nitrogen time is that residual nitrogen time plus your actual bottom time or actual dive time. Another thing you'll see on here that you'll see on most dive logbooks is a stop, and that's what this little line is here for. So did you do a safety stop? How deep and for how long? Again, your typical safety stop is 5 meters or 15 feet for 3 minutes. Depending on your dive, as you become a deeper diver, sometimes people do a deeper stop. And you'll learn more about that and sort of, do you want to do deep stops and not. But in the meantime, we highly encourage a safety stop at 15 feet, 5 meters for 3 minutes, at least 3 minutes, before ascending to the surface. So that is your dive log. And with that said, we're going to talk about computers a little bit, because you'll see dive log books, and you are going to have one given to you. as part of your open water course. But I highly encourage all divers to purchase a modern dive computer. Most modern dive computers have well, they all have some kind of log function on them, and some of them will actually, through Bluetooth, log to an application that will take all that basic data, your depth, your time, your profile, and put that right into a nice document for you. We'll put it into a computer program, and it will give you a much more detailed dive profile, really showing you, exactly how deep you were at any point during your dive. And it's a much more robust way, a much more interesting way and useful way of tracking information, because we typically do not stay at our deepest depth for an entire dive. So if we're going back and we're saying, hey, what did I actually do on this dive? You say, oh, I spent most of my time on this dive at 30 feet. I went down to 60 feet to see, I saw a fan coral down there I wanted to check out, but I spent most of my time at 30 feet. Now, if you're using dive tables, it will assume you did all your time at 60 feet. A dive computer, however, will track you at every depth you're at and give you credit for that. So it will track both the on-gassing and off-gassing as you go deeper, and as you go shallower, your body taking on and releasing nitrogen. And it's going to be using a pretty complicated algorithm to track both your slower and your faster tissues. Different algorithms use different numbers of tissues, which, if you want to get into that, that's a whole big neat science thing. But it will give you what it does. It maximizes your dive time by crediting you for the time you've spent at shallower depths, without penalizing you for having gone a little bit deeper than coming back shallower. It dramatically increases your no decompression limit, especially on repetitive dives, and they do not give you that huge penalty for having a reverse profile for doing a deeper dive after a shallower dive, because they are going to be so accurate. And tracking you at every depth during your dive. There's also no need to use dive tables for planning your dive, since most dive computers will have a planning function in them where you go through and it will give you a variety of depths, just like a dive table will, and will give you the associated no decompression limit for that depth. More so with the dive computers, you can program them to multiple levels of conservatism. So you can make them safer and safer, with them giving you kind of less and less no decompression limits. If you say, you know what, I'm going to be diving a lot, I think I want to be a little more conservative, and you can program in a higher level of conservatism into them if you wish to increase your safety. Also, they give you your no decompression limit, real time, based on the depth you are at. So you might be down at 60 feet, and they say, all right, you've got 10 minutes left at 60 feet. You ascend up to 30 feet, and you're like, oh, well, look at this. You've got 90 minutes at 30 feet, and it really gives you a lot more flexibility in your diving. They also alert you to rapid ascents. They automatically start your safety stops for you. If you're doing deep diving, a lot of them will automatically start a deep stop for you. And it also allows you to log dives. So if you're still keeping paper logs, and I highly encourage you keeping some sort of a paper log where you're tracking those important details that your computer won't track. Again, the exposure protection you're wearing, the weight you're wearing, things you saw, details that you want to remember. Great thing to have a paper log for. But with the dive computer, you don't have to, be checking your watch and trying to synchronize things for like as you're ascending and descending and remembering exactly what time you descended and what time you ascended. The computer will do that for you, which allows you to just pay more attention to what's going on around you, rather than having to closely watch your bottom timer. But you should know how to keep a logbook, and again, it's those details that are personal to you that really make a logbook valuable. It is a great resource, and I hope you take advantage of it as you dive. Thank you very much, and I will see you underwater.